Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome.
Good afternoon.
My name is Roxanne Basiley. I'm the project coordinator for the Wake County Enslaved Persons Project. I've been with the Register of Deeds for 22 years, and I can honestly tell you in all this time, I've never been so excited about deeds before. The history we uncover together will have a deep impact on our community and on people's lives. Today's event is not about teaching you how to do the work in this project, but it's to show you what can be done when you do the work in this project. We want you to get excited, but we also want you to be prepared. This project will not be easy. In fact, it will be tedious and it can be heartbreaking. But most importantly, this project will be incredibly meaningful. It will be a foundation for the histories and the families to build upon and broaden by what we do together. We're going to start today's program with Abby Kellerman. She is the Assistant Park Manager for Education here at beautiful historic Oakview County Park. They've been working on their own project, and I think you'll agree the results are soul-stirring. Thank you all for coming. We are so thrilled that you all see the importance of this project.
Hello, and welcome to historic Oakview County Park. My name is Abby Kellerman, and I'm the Assistant Park Manager of Education here at Oakview. We are so excited to be able to serve as a host to kick off the Wake County Register of Deeds Enslaved Persons Project. Our work here at Oakview ties directly into the work of the project. Historic Oakview County Park interprets North Carolina's diverse agrarian past and invites families to explore daily farm life. The property's history reflects the transition from an antebellum plantation into sharecropping and tenant farming in the post-Civil War era. From 1840 to 1865, 14 enslaved men, women, and children shaped Oakview's natural and cultural landscape. Their names are Eliza Hutchings, Isabella and her sons Walt, Levy, and Sandy Williams, and Sam, Celia, and Patsy. We know very little about the very first enslaved individuals at Oakview, only that there was one male, 30 to 54 years old, and one female, 10 to 24 years old. Both were probably sold by Benton Williams by 1850. At least 4 more individuals, whose names are still unknown to us, lived and labored on this land over the course of the decade, and 1 baby was born on Clinton Williams' farm. Their ages and gender are told to us by the 1860 census: a 60-year-old woman, a 48-year-old man, a 14-year-old girl, a 10-year-old girl, and a 6-month-old baby boy. But the reason I'm able to share the names of Eliza, Isabella, Walt, Sandy, Levy, Sam, Celia, and Patsy is because of the records housed at the Register of Deeds. It is essential that historic sites like Oakview present a comprehensive and conscientious interpretation of the history of slavery. However, this type of historical research is often challenging. One of the biggest difficulties is locating primary source records that tell us about the lives of enslaved people. So much of the record keeping and preservation of history ignored the personhood and the lives of enslaved people. For most of history, these individuals' lives were not documented in the historical record. For plantation sites like Oakview, we rely on records such as census records and agricultural accounts, deeds of sale, and oral histories. We piece these parts together and add context with secondary sources to tell a full and nuanced story about the past lives of historical figures. While the actual doing of history, the research in dusty archives, the combing through 19th century records, and decoding 19th century handwriting may not be everyone's cup of tea, it is that essential work that we must do to lay the foundation. Upon that foundation, we can interpret and present history in an accurate, accessible, and engaging way. At Oakview, we started with the census records. However, the census records only record information about the white residents of Oakview, Benton Williams and his family. The 1860 slave schedule recorded only the gender and age of the enslaved people, no names. However, we were able to search the Register of Deeds property records. Since enslaved people were viewed in the eyes of law as property, the sale, gift, or transfer of enslaved people was recorded through deeds. We have been able to find the deeds of sale that show Benton Williams purchasing or receiving enslaved people. These deeds list the names and the ages of the enslaved people, which we cross-referenced with the genders and ages recorded on the slave schedule. This is how we piece together a name, a life, a story. Thanks to the records from the Register of Deeds, when fourth grade students come here on a field trip, they don't just learn a broad story of agriculture and farming. They learn the story of Eliza Hutchings, her work as an enslaved woman on the plantation, her labor, her skills, and how she and the other enslaved people created community and exhibited resilience. They also learn about the choices and actions she took after the Civil War to claim her freedom, to create a home for herself and care for her family. In 1877, Eliza and her husband Reddick purchased 43 acres of land from Clinton Williams, finally able to work for themselves. We know this because the land purchase was also recorded in the Register of Deeds records. This history matters. Names matter. The work of the Enslaved Persons Project will make available the history of more individuals, more names, and more histories that need to be told. I've talked a lot about the challenge of locating primary source documentation and first-person narratives, and that's all certainly true. But I would urge you to spend some time tonight considering Oakview as a site of conscience. All around us are physical reminders of how the enslaved community shaped Oakview's natural and cultural landscape in powerful and fundamental ways. Visiting historic sites like Oakview, engaging with the history and the legacy of enslavement in our country, and learning about the lives of Oakview's enslaved community all serve to connect us to a shared past and a shared humanity, one that understands the legacy of that past and the work of healing and justice that still needs to be done. At the conclusion of the speakers tonight, I invite you to stop by our 1870s tenant house, which is right behind me. It's open to the public, and you can check out our newest exhibit, which focuses on the ways that landless farmers created a home for themselves, the actions they took to secure true freedom through labor and land ownership, and the strategies of resilience and resistance they engaged in despite working in an oppressive labor system. The tenant house will remain open until 7:30 p.m. tonight. Thank you so much for your time. I'm very pleased to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Erin Moore. Dr. Moore is the Executive Director for the Shaw University Center for Racial and Social Justice. Dr. Moore has a wealth of higher education experience, including roles as Assistant Professor of History at Central State University and as Adjunct Professor of History at Spelman College. She most recently worked as a consultant for diversity, equity, and inclusion training and creating African American Studies curricula for K-12 schools. Dr. Moore earned her Bachelor of Arts degree in Economics at Spelman College, her Master's degree in African American Studies from The Ohio State University, and her doctorate in African American Studies from Temple University. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Moore.
Can everyone hear me?
Great.
In the struggle for freedom, a history of African Americans, the authors write, though bondspeople might toil all day, they nourish their souls and maintain their dignity, creating room for the human spirit to live. They took pleasure in something good to eat, a splash of color to wear, the joy in one's body, in music and dance, and the ability to find love in one another, and to create space in which the personal self could exist and breathe. Oftentimes when we think about slavery, we think about it in abstract terms. This is a way of distancing ourselves from the horror and the brutality and the terror that was American slavery. It's easy to think of the enslaved as nameless faces, as part of a horde, barely distinguishable from one another. But they were people. They had hopes and they had dreams. They loved and they fought. They suffered, and at times they found joy. But who were they? And where did they come from? How was their family composed? And how long did they live? It is these questions, along with others, that are central to this Wake County Enslaved Persons Project in partnership with Shaw University. How did slavery begin in the Carolinas? Well, the first record we have is they were starting to come in the early 1600s. But by 1663, the British lords proprietors offered additional acreage to each white person that brought in an enslaved African, male or female, and that they stayed for at least 5 years. In the Carolinas, as the colonies were growing, the labor-intensive crops of indigo, tobacco, and cotton necessitated the need for enslaved people to build the colonies. But what was slavery like? A lot of times we think of slavery, we think of one particular type of slavery in terms of the work that they did. And that's plantation slavery. But there's two other types of slavery. I wonder if you all know what other types of work that slaves did. This is a pop quiz. I'm sorry?
They built the North Carolina Railroad.
They did, absolutely. Now that's a particular classification. I'm gonna see if we can figure out.
Industrial.
Exactly. In addition to plantation slavery, working in the fields, we had house slaves and we had the independent craftsmen. A lot of people don't think about those independent craftsmen. Those are the people that had the skilled labor. Those are the people that were able to rent themselves out and to make money. They worked for various other industries and were able to leave the plantation. Oftentimes I ask my students, what would you rather be, a house slave or a field slave? And they would say, oh, a house slave, obviously, because we're inside the house. But actually the house slaves had it worse. They were on call 24/7. They never got to spend time with their families. At the end of the day, the field slaves could go back into their cabins, they could go back with their communities, they could be with their families, they could cook their food, they could sing their songs, but not the ones in the house. Even women in particular had it really bad. They did not want their daughters to be part of the house slaves. And even though you think you're living in a house, you're living great, oftentimes the enslaved slept at the foot of the bed. They had their own private space. So in addition to that, what else was slavery like? Oftentimes when we think of the cabins or the huts that they lived in, they were often 6 to 8 people in a house. There was no insulation. They slept in barley sacks. And that's when we began to quilt and to make more of our own homemade things so that our lives would be comfortable. In terms of food, as we all know, they ate a lot of the leftovers. They only got special treatment during Christmas where they would get, a turkey, a ham, maybe some wine, something to celebrate. And of course, we can't talk about slavery without talking about the punishments. Most of the times we think about the whippings, because that's what we see and we hear, but there was other forms of punishment. Oftentimes they had to wear cowbells around the neck. They were put into stocks. But the most detrimental form of punishment that the slaves endured was the threat of sale. The threat that they would sell your family member at any moment in time. And that's why these deeds are so important. It allows us to be able to see who these families were. How many children do they have? If we do another census, were some of the children missing? That may give us insight into the fact that maybe these children were sold away. And so why is this important? How is this a matter of justice and racial healing? Because we're at a moment in time where a lot of people don't think that slavery is important or that it matters and that we should just forget about it. But if we're going to be a part of a racial reckoning or a healing in this country, we have to acknowledge the past. We've got to be able to figure out what happened. We've got to be able to learn from the mistakes of the past. And it's a way for us to learn as a community, but also to provide healing and hope to the family members who will be able to trace their ancestry. And with that, I thank you very much, but I'm going to introduce our next speaker. We're still going to go to Claire? Okay. All right. Our next speaker, we're very pleased to have because she has done so much of this important work in terms of the People Not Property Project. Dr. Claire Heckel is an interdisciplinary anthropologist and has been the project coordinator for the People Not Property Project at the University of North Carolina in Greensboro since January of 2019. She holds a PhD in archaeological anthropology from New York University and a bachelor's degree in sociology and anthropology from Randolph-Macon College in Virginia. Her research focuses on the intersections of material culture and identity in historical and prehistoric context. She held a postdoctoral positions at the University of Toulouse in France and the American Museum of Natural History in New York. She is a 2021-2022 Research Fellow in the American Council of Learned Societies and a Research Associate in the Division of Anthropology and the American Museum of History. Dr. Heckel has worked in a wide variety of historical and geographic contexts, ranging from the earliest human societies in Western Europe, Eastern Africa, and the indigenous nations of the Great Plains. She has taught courses at New York University, UNC Charlotte, UNC Greensboro, and Guilford College, and has lectured on art and human societies in institutions including Harvard, Stanford, Oxford, and the Sorbonne. With regard to the institution of slavery in the United States, she has conducted archaeological field work at Thomas Jefferson's Poplar Forest in Virginia and historic Brattonville in South Carolina. She's also examined the public presentations of historic narratives related to state slavery in Poplar Forest and the community-run Legacy Museum of African American History in Lynchburg, Virginia. It's my honor to introduce Dr. Claire Heckel.
Thank you. Right. Yes, so for the last 3 years, I have been the project coordinator for the People Not Property Project, of which Wake County was one of 26 participating counties. Can everyone hear me? Okay. The Digital Library on American Slavery is a project out of the university libraries at UNC Greensboro. It began when one of the digital technology consultants at the university was spending a lot of time with history professor Lauren Schwenninger. He's written a number of books on slavery in the South and in North Carolina specifically. And he just had troves and troves and troves of paper archives related to this history. So that conversation became how do we digitize them for preservation, but also make them searchable. You can see an example on this handout of a slave deed from Wake County. It's documenting the sale of a 15-year-old boy named Dudley for $400 in 1825. Handwritten documents are not, as of yet, searchable by text. A lot of machine learning folks are working on that technology, but it's slow to develop. If any of you have worked with these historic documents, you know that they're quite challenging to read. So one of the main points of this project is to transcribe these handwritten documents so that they are searchable by location, by first name, by date range. For anyone who's done genealogy involving enslaved persons, you know that often there are little tidbits of information that you have, and it can be very difficult when you don't have a last name, which is how a lot of these records are indexed. You might have a date range, a county, or a set of properties and a first name. So the elements in the Digital Library on American Slavery are filling in a lot of pieces for a lot of people doing that work, as well as informing the work of academic historians and people in related disciplines. So that includes the Race and Slavery Petitions Project. That is a set of documents related to court cases involving enslaved people, but also free persons of color. And they include quite a lot of information about daily life, as well as seeing peaks and restrictions being placed on enslaved people at times when rebellion and other freedom-seeking activities or sabotage. If you're looking for documents related to resistance to enslavement, this is really a great resource. Also, the North Carolina Runaway Slave Advertisements Project has digitized more than 2,300 runaway slave ads documenting freedom seekers. As far as dress, personality, personal appearance, these are very rich records. So of course they were not printing photographs of freedom seekers, so they tried to give as full a description as possible, and this is really a wonderful resource for putting very humanizing details on enslaved people. The Transatlantic Slave Trade Database is a project out of Emory University. It provides some fantastic lesson plans, maps, videos, but also a very rich database of 35,000 voyages across the Atlantic and between the Caribbean, South America, and the US. And then, of course, People Not Property, the Slave Deeds of North Carolina, is the final current component of that project. All of the work that's going on in Wake County will be merged into that big database of slave deeds. There are also new projects beginning at UNC Pembroke, at East Carolina University, and at North Carolina Central, working on several more counties. So we've completed work in 26 counties, or at least begun it. It varies quite a bit from county to county, depending on the amount of records that are preserved. To date, we have identified 11,000 deeds with 40,000 individuals named. And before I turn it over to Dr. Johnson, I would like to also open up if any of you have questions about this work or these deeds or what's in them. I'm happy to answer them. Or about doing the work. We do have videos online. Okay, do you have the introduction? Yes. Okay. And just in closing, the reason that we're wrapping up at UNC Greensboro is we had a 3-year grant funding this work from the National Historic Public Records Commission. It's closing, and I'm very happy to see so many people here and so many people interested in continuing this very important work. And hopefully we will get all 100 counties complete and have a very robust and complete history of our state in that regard. Dr. Valerie Ann Johnson is the Dean of Arts, Sciences, and Humanities and Professor of Sociology at Shaw University in Raleigh, North Carolina. Previously, she was the Mott Distinguished Professor of Women's Studies and Director of Africana Women's Studies at Bennett College in Greensboro, North Carolina. She holds a PhD in medical anthropology from the University of California, Berkeley, and in San Francisco, an MA in sociology from Atlanta University, and a BA in sociology from Spelman College. Dr. Johnson has also completed doula training focused especially on women of color. Her research conducted in Costa Rica, Zimbabwe, Tanzania, and the Seychelles Islands, and in the U.S., center on gender, bioethics, disability, the health of women and girls, and environmental justice. Other scholarly projects include work with Dr. Kamira Jeffrey at Hampton University on a joint collection of essays on the speculative and science fiction work of Black women and girls, with Dr. Crystal Moten at Macalester on compiling and editing an interactive intersectional database on women, gender, and slavery. And Dr. Johnson also chairs the North Carolina African American Heritage Commission, serves on the North Carolina Historical Commission, National Register Advisory Committee, and is a member of the North Carolina Environmental Justice Network, North Carolina League of Conservation Voters, Board of Directors, Scarrett Bennett Center Board of Directors in Nashville, Tennessee, and the Ms. Committee of Scholars, and as an advisor on the Humanities Action Labs initiative on climate change, immigration, migration, and environmental justice. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Johnson to you all.
Good evening, everyone, and I promise you my remarks are not going to be as long as the introduction. It's kind of, when you hear all of that, it's kind of sobering. But it does give you an indication of how we can be interconnected and interdisciplinary in the work that we do. My role here for tonight is just to give you a little bit of information about Shaw University, or how Shaw University is involved in this project, And I'd like to first start with, we know that it was founded in 1865. And if we think about what 1865 means in our collective memory, we know that that was the year of formal emancipation. Now, emancipation occurred in all kinds of different ways, both legal and not legal. People emancipated themselves by running away, and that's why some of these records are so important. We had folks running away to places within the state. We had people going just across the river and back. There was a lot of movement. But what I'd like for you to really think about in this project, and I am so delighted that we have folks volunteering, is the idea that we have tangible evidence records of people who were thought of as property. And that for some of them, the only thing that we know about them comes from records that identify them as not human, but as property. And so this project resonates with us at Shaw University as a historically black college and university, the first in the South to have been established, to have both males and females. We also were a place where folks could imagine themselves differently than being property. And we invite you to imagine with us what it means, what it meant, and what it will mean to have this kind of documentation process, and that you can be involved as citizens. That here are some of your tax dollars at work. Here is where you can make a difference. You can have an input in what we know. And that is also a cornerstone of public humanities. So that's what this project is about. And we're going to involve our students in something that is meaningful to them. Maybe not at first, because I'm going to tell you, the work is hard and they may fuss at us. But later on, when they reflect back, they'll be able to see, okay, I did this. I learned these skills. It's also an opportunity to learn another aspect of local government. That local government isn't something distant from us, but it's very close. And I have to appreciate Tammy Brunner coming to Shaw University to incorporate and ask us to be a partner. So the title of the project is really called The Deeds Project at Shaw University in partnership with Wake County Register of Deeds. And I have to say that my faculty helped come up with that name. One faculty member is here, Dr. Quinn Doran. Stand up. He's a professor of history at Shaw University and one of the lead faculty involved, and Dr. Irina Negrera, who is in charge of she's a program coordinator for our interdisciplinary studies program, which means we're unfolding all the aspects of humanities, a little bit of social science, and even potentially those who are interested in the natural sciences, because we can, as we look at these records and think about the implications, maybe it will, I would say, inspire someone to say, well, what's the forensic evidence that supports what we have found in this record? And the final thing I would like to say about this wonderful partnership and this work is that we are able to include our students doing direct hands-on activities, and that the liaison, the lead to help with the students, help supervise them, is a recent Shaw graduate, and that is Maria Greene. She just finished in interdisciplinary studies in 2021. And so this helps keep the continuity. And so you here are now part of our network. And I invite you to think too of how you can work with us at Shaw University and work with the Register of Deeds. Come out to this wonderful example of what was built with the hands of free labor, because that's what I see when I see this particular site, and what happens when capital is generated when you don't have to pay except in the sweat and tears of the persons who provide that labor. So it is, yes, a wonderful place, a sobering place, but it's also, as Dr. Moore said, a place where we can heal. And we heal by knowing. Knowledge is not something that makes us worse. It makes us better as humans. And so I invite you into the humanity of this project. At this time, Ernest Dollar will come up, and I don't have your bio. But one of the things, he's another partner with us in terms of helping us interpret some of our history, and that's the Pope House. I won't say anything more about that, but to give you that little tantalizing tidbit that the Pope House is connected to Shaw University. Thank you, Ernest.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson. My name is Ernest Dollar, and I'm the director of the City of Raleigh Museum and the Pope House Museum. The City of Raleigh Museum is run by the Parks, Recreation, and Cultural Resources Department. We're right down in Fayetteville Street, so I encourage you to come and see us. And the Pope House is a stone's throw away from Shaw University, and the home of one of the first licensed black doctors in North Carolina. It's a treasure trove of history. But tonight I want to tell you a story about what this research can do. What can it lead to? And the amazing story of what happens when connections are made. And I apologize in advance if I get overwhelmed telling this story, because it is a deeply moving personal story for me to tell. And it all gets back, the very moment that I made that phone call on June 3rd, 2019, when I called New York, and the woman picked up the phone and she simply said, "Hello, Ernest, I've been waiting to talk to you." And how that entire journey got to that phone call is the story I want to tell you, and the value of doing this research and what it means for those people who you connect to. So in 2015, the City of Raleigh purchased Dorothea Dix Hospital. It was the state's formal asylum for the mentally ill. They had big plans to turn into a great shining star of a park, the Central Park of the South, it was taunted as. So as us at the museum decided to do our due diligence to tell the story of this site. We knew it was a hospital, so we wanted to portray the patient experience. We met with those people who worked there, who were so dedicated to helping these troubled people, and had such a great group of people that came together for over 50 years. And we wanted to tell Raleigh about what a great future this park could be, what this, a magical place could be. But in our research, we stumbled upon this incredible fact that 150 years before the hospital, it was a plantation, the plantation of Theophilus Hunter. So we thought we must include this story. So we set about trying to research the experience of the Hunter families, both white and black. And in trying to do this research, I found myself goofing off in a meeting one day, right? Meeting I didn't need to be in, and so when historians are in meetings and they kind of wander around, what do? We do research. So as I'm sitting in this meeting just goofing off, I'm going down the 1870 census because I wanted to try to run this. Did African Americans in emancipation with freedom take the last names of their masters? So I was just kind of going along, nodding my head in the meeting, just highlighting all of these African Americans who were named Hunter, who were still in Raleigh. Then I ran across it, an incredible entry of one man, John Hunter, and what astounded me about this man was his age. It was listed at 101 in 1870, so I had to pause and calculate how old this guy would have possibly been. So we're talking about 1760s, an incredible age for this man. So I thought, wow, this is an interesting story. So I decided to dig a little bit more, go through some of the records, and I decided to go to look in the old newspapers. Newspapers.com, you can lose days and days of researching through all newspapers. And I found it. When I found it, I fell out of my chair. And what it was an obituary of John Hunter. And the News Observer listed his life. Because he was so old, he got this special treatment. And what this article said was amazing. It talked about old Uncle John. Uncle John, who remembered seeing the British during the American Revolution below Raleigh. It talked about him seeing America's first birthday. It talked about him going to war with his master for the War of 1812. He remembers emancipation when it came to Raleigh. And he remembers America's 100th birthday in July 1876. He had seen an incredible life here in Raleigh and lived to tell about it. Now, more importantly, his obituary in the paper listed his son and his grandchildren. So I thought, wow, wouldn't that be something? I never would really work to find his family. Nah, but let's go for it. So the more I dug, the pieces began to fall into place. I found his grandchildren, his grandchildren, and on and on and on. And suddenly I figured out, would it be possible to actually find a living descendant of Uncle John? Would that not be incredible? To span 3 centuries from 1760 all the way up to 2019. So through research, through grinding hours of going through records, I had some names. So trying to find living people is somewhat a lot harder than finding dead old people. So I found them. And I made a couple of calls. Most of them I found were living in New York. But whenever this guy calls you in New York talking about your slave ancestors with this accent, I didn't get many calls back. But it wasn't until I found a woman who was living in New York named Juanetta Worthy. And I couldn't find her number, and I found that her husband had worked at Pratt Institute in New York. So I found his email address, and I emailed him, I was like, hey, are you married to Juanetta? And he says, well, yes, I am. And I said, sit back, because I'm about to tell you a story. So I told Ray the whole story, and he's like, all right, call us tomorrow. And you can imagine the emotion I felt that all of this research I'd done had led to this ancestor of John Hunter, New York. And that was that call on June 13th, 2019, when Juanetta said, Ernest, I'm so happy to talk to you. And she told me an incredible this story, and I told her, and it took us several phone calls for her to trust me and to trust my research. But in that first initial phone call, it's very humbling for a historian, a highlight of any historian's life, to make these great connections. And the meaning behind what she told me just floored me. And what she told me is that her mother had recently passed, and all of her family had been scattered. And she felt that this was the moment, this call, that this ancestor in a far-off North Carolina could pull her family back together. And she said it was no mistake. In her words, she felt as it was the ancestors who brought me together with Juanetta. This gives me the chills to talk about it. So for several more months, Juanetta and I exchanged information. I sent her all the information I had, and we corresponded, and she checked it out through her family and all the family branches, and it just grew into this wonderful relationship. So one day I said, Juanetta, come down. You and Ray come down, and we'll show you all these places in Raleigh. We'll go to Dorothea Dix. We'll go to the plantation home that your family helped build here in Raleigh. We'll look around and see some stuff. So as we planned this trip and kept on getting speed, she said, well, I want to bring a couple more family members down. I said, oh, that's great. That's really great. So it went from 2 to 3 until 28 ancestors, her family, showed up in November of 2019. And I was a little nervous that all these people came from all across the United States based on me goofing off in one meeting. So we get together, we take a trolley ride, we go to Dorothea Dix, we have them stand on the very structure that the sweat and blood of their ancestors helped build. We went to Mount Hope Cemetery to see where some of their family was buried, to see St. Paul's AME Church that their ancestors built and are still enshrined in the stained glass in that church. It was wonderful, a magical opportunity. But that project has continued to grow. More family members want to be involved in this. Now, what we tried to do, we've got the original 1798 will of Theophilus Hunter with his 60 slaves on it. We are trying to find descendants of all of these 60. It's an amazing, impossible task, but if you don't look, you do not find. So we've connected with other Hunter families, and this whole effort is starting to grow. Even the descendants, the white descendants of Theophilus Hunter, are some of the most passionate researchers who are helping us to tell this story. It has brought enslaved and enslaver descendants together. That is the power of this project we are launching. We do not know where the ramifications of this project will go. We do not know how it will affect the hearts of all the people it touches. But all we can do is present it out there, because this research we do with this project will live long after this and infect many more generations. So thank you guys for showing up this evening and being a part of this, and I encourage you to have your own moments like this where you connect the past with the present and present it to the future. So I want to introduce the really heart of this project. Tammy Brunner is the Register of the Deeds of Wake County. And without her support and her gumption and her drive, we would not be here tonight talking about this amazing project. So, Tammy.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. That was pretty impressive and informative, right? We are so happy, so proud, so excited to be kicking off this project tonight. But I want to give a couple of shout outs to a few people that have really done most of the actual work. I want to really give a special thank you to Dr. Claire Heckel, who has held my hand about this project longer than I've actually even had this job. Without the work that she did with the People Not Property Project, we literally would not be sitting here right now. So thank you, Claire. I want to thank Shaw University for giving this project validity and validating the work that needs to be done throughout this county and hopefully through the 99 other counties in North Carolina. We're really excited about the names and the lives that this project gives to people. These names and these lives have been hidden in these books for way too long. And it's just past time for us to do something about this. What we are really doing with this project is building a foundation to do all of the things that Dean Johnson, Dr. Moore, and Ernest told you. We are the cement on the floor of how big this project is actually going to be and what we can really build and learn from this. If you are one of the 107 people when I left the office today at 4 o'clock to come here that have already signed up to volunteer on this project, first thing in the morning, you'll get an email from Roxanne Basiley with a training by Claire that explains all of the work that we're doing, how to do it. You'll get some test things that Claire also put together to teach you how to read these deeds. Please remember that these documents are not only in cursive, they're written in Old English, they're not easy to read, and they're really hard to take. I really want to stress to everyone, if you're participating in this project, to practice self-care while you are reading these deeds. I can't thank each of you enough for coming to this event tonight. And I'd be remiss if I just didn't share with you how moved, how proud, how excited, how just elated that I get to play an extremely small role in what we are doing and the foundation that we are building. That's it. That's the program. Claire, I'm sure, would be happy to come up here now that you've heard all of this and maybe have more questions. We'll do that, but I also want y'all to make sure that you take time and visit the tenant house and see the work that Abby and Emily and Jess have done here at Oakview to give a name and a story to the enslaved people that lived and worked on this land. Thank you. Does anyone have any questions for Claire? I'm not going to make you sit if you... Okay.
Could you just say the where people could sign up who haven't necessarily volunteered?
Yes, that was in my notes, but I forgot. So the easiest thing to do is really just Google Wake County Register of Deeds. On our website, you will see a bar that says Enslaved Persons Project. It will explain the Enslaved Persons Project to you, and there will be a link to sign up. and you will immediately hear from Roxanne with how to move forward. Thank you.
Your emails are also on the handout.
Yes, Claire also put our emails, mine and Roxanne's, on the handout. Is that what you were going to ask?
Sure. So these deeds are mixed in. Oh, the question was if there are a variety of ways to volunteer. The answer is yes. For people who are experienced with historic documents, a lot of them jump right into transcription. People who have less experience, what we're looking for is identifying these deeds. So each deed book might be 300 to 500 pages long, and there are property deeds in it, and then there are slave deeds. So really just learning to recognize certain key words, such as slave, Negro, looking for first names, boy, child, woman, man, in the middle of the deed, is the first place we try to get people to start. And that way you can kind of get a sense for how these documents are organized and how the handwriting looks before jumping into transcription. And that's actually where a lot of the heavy lifting is, just the going page by page to find these deeds. Also, all of that can be done remotely. I don't know if we'd mentioned that yet, but if you want to work in person, there are deed books at the Register of Deeds office, but with a free account on Family Search, your coordinators will provide links and you can work from home or the office or wherever you might have a few minutes. Also, we have volunteers, some of whom, go through thousands of deeds. They're just both very dedicated and have the extra time. We also have people who might get an hour or two in a month around all of the other demands on their time. So even if you can just do that hour or two a month, don't be shy about contributing because all of it really does help.
Do you have a timeline for the project? Like, can you access these records currently?
Yes, the records are currently accessible. Some of the books have been gone through and we have a table of contents for which ones are relevant to enslaved people. It gets very difficult to figure out when the work will be complete because there are so many moving parts. But the books themselves are currently available online.
Can I just add to that? So when you once you pass the test of being able to read these deeds, we will send you an assignment. And it will be something in effect of, you are going to have book 5, pages 4 through 42. And it is your job to go through there and identify the enslaved persons within these pages. And if you're ready, to then transcribe. And all of this, you will get a video that you have to watch that Claire painstakingly tells you exactly what you're looking for, what are key words, what the handbook gives you examples of cursive writing. We give you lots of information, but those emails are for any random question you have is to ask us.
Also, I'll add that the handwriting, we're talking about how hard it is. It is challenging. However, after you've been doing it for a few hours, it will click. You do reach a point where your eyes kind of get used to it and it goes a lot faster. So if you get started and it's taking you an hour to read one document, don't get discouraged. It'll get to the point where you can kind of quickly skim pages and it'll jump out at you when you find what you're looking for. We had a question here?
The gentleman. Sorry, I
behind you and then, yeah.
Okay, I would like to ask those young men about OJ at Dorothea. Is that area being reserved?
Dorothea did.
Where is Ernest?
Dorothea did.
Oh, he's back there.
I'm going to get him to come see you, okay? Because he's talking to somebody.
Okay. Yes, they are. Oh, sorry. The question was, are the deed books for all counties currently online? They are. You need to go into the Family Search website. We have these instructions. I think I provided them to Tammy as well. So you can email the team at UNCG or at the Wake County office, and we have instructions for how to find those counties. They're not searchable yet, but there's kind of a list of links you can hop through to get there by looking within North Carolina records.
We also have a training book available that you can take with you tonight, a hard copy that answers a lot of these things. You'll also get this electronically, but if you want a hard copy, we have some to give you.
So the Wake County Register of Deeds office is doing Wake County. However, Shaw and also UNC Greensboro, there are people who've wanted to start local efforts, and we're happy to support that. We can provide links. You can also still use the handbook and the spreadsheets and all of the tools that we've developed. So we're very happy to help people get started in other counties.
And I would just like to say, I'd like to say that I'm familiar with Granville County, and it is very important, and we can talk later because Oxford will be a very interesting complement to what is happening here in Wake County. And so it does make sense. The same with Durham County and North Carolina Central University, sort of the hub for understanding what is going on in Durham County.
I'll add that we've gotten a lot of progress done in Orange County, North Carolina Central. While Shaw is focusing on Wake, North Carolina Central will be working on Orange. Durham was put together post-Civil War out of several counties. Also, they'll be working in person, possibly Granville as well. Dr. Charles Johnson in the Public History program at Central is heading all of that up. But more and more counties are coming, and we're happy to support with any resources we can anyone who wants to work independently in other counties.
That's kind of the goal. We're the foundation. All the 26 counties that Claire has been working on, and us in Wake County, to where it just spreads like a fire across the state and across the country. There are snacks in the gazebo, and there's water, and we'll go ahead and have the handbooks over there as well that you can pick up. But please take your time and go through this amazing tenant house over here and see the work that they've done to restore it. Thank y'all so much.